Well, look, guess what? We are live, and I think, John, you've got everything figured out over there?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well,
We
today's,
hear you.
what's that?
I said, we hear you, John.
Yeah,
That's the important part.
I think this is episode 39, so we'll have 40 next week.
Ooh.
Wow. Today's topic, classified listings and cost per VDP. Is it still relevant? Yes, no. Dan joins us. He's from the Anderson Automotive Group and also inventor of Big Deal. Maybe get into that a little bit later. Dan's been on the dealership side, of course. He's voyaged over into the vendor side and now back on the dealer side. And he's actually the one that proposed the question because he's coming back on the dealership side after a few years and wondering, what are some of the different KPIs that dealerships are now measuring? And I guess before you went over to the vendor side, one of those big KPIs was your VDP views. So you're asking, this is still a relevant KPI that we should be looking at. And typically, if we have any type of data questions, we chime on Mr. Berna's front door, Mr. Truth. John, thanks for joining us. John's with Driven Data, and like I said, he usually joins us whenever we've got some data or some numbers that we got to find the truth on. So welcome, John. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
So I think I think it's a great topic. I mean, obviously it's a great topic. I know probably the third-party classifieds might be wondering, sometimes I'll get an email afterwards whenever we go down this path, and usually it's pretty positive, but every now and then I'll get a sort of a middle finger. Not so much, but something like that.
Oh man, if you're not getting a middle finger from
then you're not doing
classified site, you're on Dealer Refresh.
That's right. Not doing it right unless you get one. So, hey, today's sponsor, Dealer Authority. Dealers, if you're struggling to keep up with your dealership's digital marketing strategy, if you always feel like you're left behind, or maybe you're just one step behind on social media, let Dealer Authority help bridge the gap between you and the customer. They utilize their expertise to improve and reinforce your dealership's message and branding in a way that's custom to your dealership across all platforms. Every Facebook post, pay-per-click, because they do pay-per-click too, is handcrafted by their automotive digital experts. So contact Dealer Authority and help your dealership stand out from the crowd. It's dealerauthority.com. Just so happens that we use Dealer Authority here at Dealer Refresh. Social's a lot to keep up with. And we know quite a few people over there. So we built, sort of have like a little strategic partnership. They help us out with their social and we help promote their products and services. And it's gone really well. I think we're, three months working with them, Alex?
No, I think they started handling our Facebook page in June.
It's June? All
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And we're like, so typically they do things for dealers, but, we're obviously not a dealership. We're a media company, if you were to classify us. And so they do business for automotive vendors as well. They don't advertise that, but we're pretty happy with what they're doing.
Yeah, all the numbers have been going up and up and up. So
yeah, next year we're already talking about how we jump into LinkedIn in 2019. So we're looking to take it from beyond Facebook and move into other mediums.
Yeah, and John, maybe you could touch on that as well, with the data behind social. And I think it won't be too long. We'll probably have someone from Dealer Authority. We'll have them on for a Refresh Friday and maybe look at the case study that they're trying to put together with us.
Yeah, we'll probably do that in January, do a recap on 2018.
Yeah.
As Tabitha likes to call it, 2017.
Inside joke. Why do we want to do 2017?
Yeah. Hi, Tabitha.
All right. So great. Definitely check out dealerauthority.com. Great services, great people over there. Again, we use them and they're doing a great job for us. So moving on, classified listings, cost per VDP. Dan, you brought this topic up in the forum on the dealership side, went to the vendor side. Now you're back on dealership side. Just wondering if that's still a relevant KPI. Overall, I guess the question is, how should we be measuring the ROI for the third-party classified websites out there? You know, is cost per VDP still a relevant measurement? And if not, how should the dealership be measuring their ROI? John, I want to open it up to you, Mr. Truth. You've got all the data behind this.
So I would say that cost per VDP is not necessarily a relevant metric because you control so much of that metric.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a measurement of AutoTrader or Cars.com's success as it is your engagement with their platform. So,
Merchandising.
yeah, I mean, like, so it's an introspective metric, I think, more than it is a scorecard on Cars.com and AutoTrader. Now, over time, if you're generally merchandising and doing everything consistently, and you see ebbs and flows,
Mm-hmm.
you have to realize and understand what's impacting that. Is it inventory based? Is it seasonal? Is it changes to the dynamics of AutoTrader or Cars.com? But I think that's more of a metric that I would score myself on, like how efficient am I with their platform? And I think if you kind of change the focus that way and own the metric, then it's just a matter of, all right, let's just make sure I have the right package, the right deal with them. I'm keeping an eye on it, but that's an influencing factor in that decision making, not the only factor.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The challenge where I pushed against that before was that cost per VDP. Obviously, your merchandising is going to have a huge impact on that. You know, no photos, those type of things. You just shot yourself in the foot. But like you said, John, if you're consistent, either within that particular vendor, if you can measure as your cost, if you don't change your package, and let's say your inventory runs relatively the same, your cost per VDP would be an indicator of probably your merchandising, pricing, those type of things. Where we used it before was a lot of in the comparative between the classifieds. So, which probably always wasn't fair. So I didn't even hold them to the same level because I was also making price and judgments based off quality of what I felt. You know, I can see lead conversions from Cars.com referrals convert higher than AutoTrader coming into the site, those type of things. So then there's a little fudging there, and it'd be interesting to hear what other dealers are doing. But I would agree. It's not the end all be all, and that's kind of the question was, you know, 2016 was the last time I was really measuring that hard, along with some other things, obviously. And, you know, fast forward to 2018, even as I'm in the dashboards, and maybe we can look at those later, but I'm sure everybody has. I've got all the three major ones. I have Edmunds too, but I'm not in their dashboard. But is to look at even how they approach it, because it's interesting, even how they present data within a dashboard, which you're an expert on, kind of what they're telling me basically I should be focusing on. And it's not always VDP.
So, Dan, what are the metrics that each one is telling you to focus on?
A lot of it's right now is activity. And so basically the interaction beyond the VDP. So the activity within the VDP, the call, the chat, the click, the map view, those type of things.
You know, what do they consider activities? And of course, it's probably different between each of the different classified sites.
It's made, yeah, and I've got it. I could share that quick. Just this morning I threw it together, and they're vastly different. So I'll share that quick.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I know some of them also clump different activities together under, you know, maybe it's a phone call and chat, and they'll say, hey, this is the same, you know, same activity. They don't break it out, which can be disappointing.
Yeah, it was interesting because each dashboard, usually they're clustered in the same spot as far as the activity, but everybody's got phone, and I listed them out here, even how they list it. Everybody's got email, it's interesting because cars.com parses out chat, and Car Gurus does as well. AutoTrader combines chat and text. And then some pieces are unique, like credit app, those type of things. The other universal is map views. Cars.com has an additional measurement of engagement of directions.
That's a good
The universal across the board is the referral, that website transfer click, which that's probably the one that's along with some leads, obviously, is easy to monitor within analytics.
Yeah, that one's definitely. What's, if you want to put an importance level on maybe map views, is that something that you really look at? Is this something you consider? And then also your website transfers?
Yeah, obviously I would rather have them be on my website, and maybe that's again, last click attribution, giving the website the pat on the back. But I already know that if a form fill comes in there, it converts quite a bit higher than a form directly from a third party. So yeah, and that'd be the discussion too, is like, what now do I measure as being the highest? Because there's a lot of variation, even what they think obviously is important, and phenomenal reps for each one of these. Other than Car Gurus, I haven't talked to him yet because I'm new back, and I don't. When I was paying them $300 a month 3 years ago, they never paid attention to me. But we pay a lot.
Now you're paying them $3,000 a month, huh?
Yeah, it's a lot higher now. So.
Hopefully they're at least paying attention to you now, right?
Yeah, but see, that Car Gurus is only measuring really 6 things in terms of that activity or interaction with the VDP, which is interesting. Plus, then their interface and their dashboard is way cleaner, and it leads out with that. Car Gurus leads out. You don't even see VDPs until you go to a separate tab, which is interesting. So that'd be the question.
So less is more, huh?
What's that?
Less is more.
Apparently, maybe they just.
Don't you guys find it interesting that AutoTrader has vehicle saves and it's that many?
That's probably a whole other conversation on, because I know there was a website trend for a while, and we still do it a little bit. I don't know if we will in the future, but that kind of that personalized garage type save your vehicle thing.
Doesn't Cars or Guru? I thought both of them had that as well.
They may, but they don't report it on their dashboard unless I completely missed it and someone could chime in and say, hey, you missed it.
Or is it combined into these reports? I wonder if you've got a car and saved, and you go back to your saved vehicles and you click on you view that VDP. Is that a VDP view?
I don't know. I mean, this right here, this is the Car Gurus dash.
Yeah.
As you log in, it's nothing but activity. There's literally no VDP data on there when you log in and hit the dashboard. It's a second tab. So, yeah, I don't know.
You can save a car on all of them, but you're right. It's not reported here.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it's interesting. It's there, but it's not reported. So maybe there's no value.
Well, I'd like to know exactly what does happen in that shopping cart per se, save a vehicle. What's going on in there? Measurement wise, I don't know. I think in the beginning when it was AutoTrader or Cars, one of them introduced it years ago, and at that time they were sharing some pretty good stats to go with it. I haven't seen much here lately, so
I mean, it's really just a super VDP. It's like a VDP, obviously. That customer's going to go back and look at that car probably more than once. So it's almost, I would call it like a super VDP, like especially if there's that many, 200, and that's in what period of time, Dan?
These dashboards are all set up to October.
For what?
The previous month.
Okay, so in your Google Drive, the sheet that you put out, that was from last month?
Yeah, that's October.
Yeah, so 194 saves in a month. I don't know what I think that's kind of higher than I would have thought. How many used cars in inventory was this for? Like 600?
At this store, this would be a total of 400. 400 new and used.
I think 194 is kind of high. I mean, I wouldn't have expected it to be that high. I don't know.
No, and it's I saw that. The others don't report it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong number. 100. Is that what you're saying, John? 194 vehicles saved.
I mean, like, what was the total VDPs from that month for Auto Trader?
That month was like 6,400.
Right.
Here's the Auto Trader. Hey, Auto Trader, if you're listening, Flash, really?
It's not going to work on your iPad.
Nope.
Oh, it does now, but it's always like this waiting game whether or not it pops up. So,
Well, again, so back to that. So
Yeah.
it'd be nice to see the other sites share the saved vehicles. I think that's a strong metric. I don't know what you can do about it from a merchandising standpoint, but knowing that you've got, and even a breakdown, I'd like to see a breakdown of
if it's
you use which vehicles are being saved, maybe a top 5 vehicles being saved.
there, maybe there is, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure they're doing the standard paying for a price drop, those type of things.
Right.
Well, we should cut you some slack, Dan, and for people who are just tuning in, Dan is fresh back in the dealership after nearly a 2-year stint at Dealer Inspire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot is the same, but a lot has changed. Like you said, Car Gurus is 4 times the money, maybe 10 times the money than it was before. So pay a little bit more attention.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hopefully, I mean, if there's someone out there on the cars.com Car Guru side.
Well, we've had some comments saying that saved vehicles are absolutely a cars.com metric.
Okay.
And Grant is saying there's saves in the VDPs in the exposure report.
Exposure report.
Yeah. Exposure report.
So it was 3%.
Reminds me of some guy in a raincoat. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
it was 3% of Dan's VDPs that ended up as a saved vehicle. So 6,400, 194 divided by 6,400. So it'd be interesting to see if that rate is consistent across all 3. If, because the VDP counts are going to be different from provider to provider. But what are the saves as a percentage of those consistent? Like, you would think that most people would, as a convenience, want to save consistently across all 3 platforms.
Whoever was in messaging, where in here does it? I'm in vehicle exposure.
So we got Chad, vehicle demand, vehicle exposure.
I like Ryan Everson. They found that slightly raising their prices on saved vehicles starts a bit of a commotion.
Oh yeah, sense of urgency.
And I've done that myself. Sometimes you go through and the market's changed a little bit, or I'm looking at my data from my Car Story app, and I'm thinking, you know what? Who marked this car down as much as they did? And the market changes a little bit, and let's take the price back up. Man, there are many times where all of a sudden you get a phone call, email.
Oh yeah. They still get that price.
Call it shaking the tree.
Shakes the tree for sure.
Hey, Dan, can you go back a page where you were before? And then in the middle, there was a drop down that had a view, and it was selected on SRP VDP.
Yeah, here, I'll go back. Oh, you want
that one that you're just at, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how to use a mouse. I'm just learning.
Trended over time. That trended report was. It looks like that it was there, where you could select a different type of view or whatever.
We went to what? Vehicle exposure? Is that where it was?
That's what it was, yeah.
In fact, that's what the Facebook audience is saying. Go under view, click save vehicles.
SRP VDP, that drop down. See if it's right there.
Ah,
Save
well,
it.
here's the question then. Auto Trader puts it right out front in the dashboard, the little wavy lines for month to month.
So, but
It's
look,
buried
so
in
SRP and
cars.com.
VDP, the total is basically the same, 107 or 117 from last month. So 109 is what it was for Auto Traders, 117, because they're basically showing it split between where the customer saved it on the VDP or on the SRP. It's probably a combined number, would be my gut.
Oh yeah.
So it's essentially the same percentage. And how many VDPs were there? If you go change the
On cars.com, it was like 3,400.
So that means the conversion to a saved vehicle is twice on cars versus Auto Trader for you last month, right?
Yeah.
Roughly. You had
According to this.
6,400 VDPs on Auto Trader.
Yeah, that'd be a safe assumption. It still goes back to, I'd still scratch my head and say, well, then why did Auto Traders see that as an important enough of a metric to put right out there, whereas cars.com, it seems like it's buried,
Yeah, I don't
especially
know.
if they're winning in that save game for.
Sometimes it's a matter of when things get developed.
Yeah,
Sure.
later.
It
Yeah,
costs a lot to go back and change old stuff.
sure. I think that saved vehicle metric is like a super VDP. It's obviously a subset of your VDPs. It's interesting how cars.com splits it. And I think it's important to split it because so many customers are just scrolling through and saving. I think it's more of a casual save versus a VDP save, which is probably more thoughtful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's hard to compare these providers too, because there's such variance in how they render the vehicles in the search result page. I mean, obviously the Auto Trader and cars.com difference is massive. You know, the number of cars on cars.com that show up is more. From Dan, I think you were suggesting that before we started, right?
Well, on the SRP?
On the SRP, right?
Oh no,
Yeah.
I was asking the question because I knew that had come up before. Is without going into a browser and open it up, were there more SRPs on a page on cars.com, Auto Trader, Car Gurus? Which one?
Yeah, because that's definitely going to skew your reporting. I've always found, you never want to compare the two exactly. It's
Right.
not an apples to apples when you're looking at the reports between the classified sites. And I've stumbled across quite a few dealerships that don't take that into account. Are there any other, to back that up, John? Are there any other measurements that are or KPIs that are vitally important for a dealership to look at that aren't the same or are measured differently between the sites? Do you know offhand?
Well, I think the big one is the SRP to VDP conversion is half between the two, right? So it's about 2 for our dealers. Looking at all the stats, I think for this month, currently the SRP to VDP conversion for Auto Trader is 2.12. For cars.com, it's about 1%. And the total number of search result page views is about double on cars.com versus Auto Trader for the current month. So those are two of the interesting stats on SRPs. In terms of other interesting stats, price impacts VDPs more on cars.com. So we can look at
Why?
percentage of the market versus how many VDPs that car gets. And when you look at the correlation between those two, there's a higher correlation on cars.com between the price being lower and getting more VDPs. So they seem to reward a lower price more than Auto Trader does.
Or would it be because that's the way people are searching? High to low, low to high.
I think that's inherent to normal behavior, right? Trying to find a cheaper car. But I think the platform rewards those cars or showcases those cars more prevalently, therefore giving them more VDPs.
Okay.
Now, my assumption would be that Car Gurus does that better than either of AutoTrader and Cars.com. I don't have the data for them, but my assumption would be it would be higher for them. Just to really stick it in your face, whether that car is, you know, well priced, poorly priced, whatever.
And they've got the little metric there, the arrow visual that helps drive that home. What about your average daily inventory count? How does that fall?
Oh yeah.
I looked at if you have more cars in stock, if there's an impact on any metric, and there's not. Obviously there is in the aggregate, like the more cars you have, the more VDPs you're gonna have.
Mm-hmm.
But in the average, it does not have an impact. So I looked at, if you have, you know, as you have more cars, does that help each of those cars individually get more SRPs or VDPs? And it doesn't. The correlation is basically zero, very close to zero.
That's good to know.
One of the
a little bit different.
What does that mean?
It's the interesting piece about VDPs per vehicle is they also don't measure that the same. And again, they didn't in 2016. AutoTrader would measure your average number of vehicles per day on the site, John, and then take your total number of VDPs and then do the math against average number per day. Cars.com would figure their VDP views per vehicle on the total number of vehicles that made an appearance in that time frame, which obviously would be higher than your average vehicles per day because of your vehicles sold and wholesaled and whatnot, against their VDP view number as well. So the math wasn't the same. And I remember having a conversation with AutoTrader at one point where they were arguing that theirs was right, but they just bought Kelley Blue Book, and Kelley Blue Book was measuring it the Cars.com way of total inventory making an appearance in the date range where those VDPs were drawn from.
The approach we take to get the numbers is we take the day-to-day change values for every car, for every dealer, every day. So we look at how many SRPs each individual car got each day and sum it up that way. And so I think that would kind of take out any variance that they do and how they represent it in their dashboards, because we do it at the car level, the day-to-day change rate.
Grant made a...
Yeah, we'll have to dive into that a little bit more in the forums, just to give our listeners and watchers a little bit more explanation behind that. What are some other, John, what else are you seeing on, I guess, you know, what other KPIs should dealerships absolutely hands down be looking at, be considering, especially whenever they're looking at the third-party classified sites? And you know, it's the end of the year, or, you know, the GM comes and over and says, hey, you know, let's start looking at this. We got to save some money here, here, and here. We got to start cutting here, here, and here. You know, last thing you really want to do, which I never really understood, whenever sales are not going so great, let's remove our marketing channels versus adding. But it's just something we tend to do. So what are some of the other KPIs? And go ahead.
Yeah, to me, I would just say, you know, an effective marketing strategy is balanced, right? And so all too often, you know, dealerships will be either over or underly reliant on classified sites. And I think the whole point of today's conversation was, is cost per VDP still relevant? And I think it is, but not to measure them necessarily, AutoTrader, Cars.com, Car Gurus. It's to measure your efficiency using their platform. Like, they're not necessarily they don't have it out for you, Mr. Dealer, one way or another. They, you know, whether you're going to get extra or less than the next guy. it's really up to your level. So I think to Dan's point, measuring that gives you a scorecard or a grade as to whether you're efficient with it or not. If you're not, if you're really bad at using it, then you probably should get off of it. But if you are engaged, if you do have a high efficiency and you really focus on those target underlying metrics that drive that efficiency metric, like merchandising, like having the right product and everything, then maybe you should spend more, because it's going to get more effective the more efficient you are.
Mhm.
And so I think just thinking about that in context of balance with other channels, I think dealerships today have more tools to advertise to their database than ever before. And so, you know, the classified sites are great for creating awareness for customers you've never sold a car to before. But still, the average dealership in 1 month, only 17% of their sales come from the database. So if we could make that number 34% and dealers could, again, have a balanced strategy there, then they may not need to spend as much on classified sites. So just balance would be, to me, and the other metric you asked, what's an important metric? What percentage of your sales come from your database? That would be a metric that I would track.
And what about your VDP views on a classified site versus your own dealership website? Same importance, less important? You know, again, I guess it really goes back to, because I know whenever I'm looking at reports like this, I do exactly what you're talking about, John. Is I don't really compare the two sites. I don't take, you know, one classified site and put it up against the other. I'm looking for trends. You know, as long as I'm consistent, what is this number telling me in relation to that particular site, whether it's my dealership website or a classified site?
Yeah, so we track that as well. So the way that we do this is 2 ways. So out of the page title, out of the URL, whoever the website provider is, we get the page views where the VIN or stock number matches from the page view in Google Analytics, and then we essentially match that against the inventory feed that we have to get how many VDPs each car has, regardless of provider, and then we'll stack that up versus AutoTrader, Cars.com, etc. And in terms of the advanced stats on website VDPs versus Cars and AutoTrader, obviously there's a higher correlation between more VDPs and the car selling faster on your site than AutoTrader or Cars.com. That VDP is essentially worth like 2 or 3 VDPs on the other 2 sites.
Okay. That's interesting. Great way to look at it. Sure. Yeah. What else? Is there any other KPIs that you would encourage? What else are you guys looking at? I mean, you guys are looking at everything.
Oh, it's mind-numbing because there's so much data. It's that death by knowledge problem we seem to have a little bit, which hasn't changed. The other thing too, John, do you think it's fair to compare yourself to another dealer by their cost per VDP? We do that a lot. We're in 20 groups and forums and stuff like that.
I think it's a complete waste of time. Yeah. I mean, and the way that we're, like, again, the database that we have, we've standardized all feeds for all dealerships, regardless CRM, whatever, to one environment. And when we compare dealerships against each other, we have normalization factors that we take. So for example, you know, if you have 4 salespeople versus 40, your metrics are going to be different, you know, in a dealership. If you have 200 cars versus 2,000 cars, your metrics are going to be different. And so you have to normalize your values and before you start comparing. In that comparison, although it gives you confidence that, hey, we're on the right track or not on the right track, or that this metric matters or it doesn't matter, the real context is your own past. Like, I would take 75% of your own past and 25% of somebody else's stats and that blend versus the other way around. Because to Dan's point, you know, a VDP is for one store in their inventory mix, and their efficiency and how they do it is not going to match yours, nor your market, or whether you have more subprime or prime, or more cars that you buy at auctions versus trades, or highline versus domestic. Like, those factors
Huge factor.
are massive. And
Okay.
so if you're not accounting for those in your normalization process, then you're not able to compare. So it's just conversation, not decision level information.
Speaking of like decision level information, one of the things I used to do, and I don't know if some other dealers do this, I've heard it on some of these forums, but if Auto Trader comes to me and says, we've got this package that you need to upgrade to, it's good because of this, and I already know, I have consistent merchandising, we're kind of flowing on our price and the merchandising, and they say, and I'm at like 69 cents VDP view, and I add that package, is it fair to basically hold them to that price staying the same? Because even though I'm adding the cost of the extra package, I'm being promised an increase in VDP views that should offset that increase in expense. Is that fair?
Unless
Yes.
it has other indirect benefits that, are important. A lot of the, offerings where you can, retarget your inventory on Facebook, for example, for cars.com social product.
Yeah, we use one of those. We use that in one store.
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively cars having the dealer pay to retarget on their own inventory, right? So
Yeah.
you as a dealer benefit from getting your car looked at multiple times, which could lead to more saved views, and that could be a good thing, and I think it's effective. I recently, I don't work at dealerships anymore, but I had to buy a car, and so I was just recently in this process of buying a car, and I was using all the sites, I was saving many vehicles, and I was retargeted like I had never been retargeted before. I mean, it is overwhelming how much retargeting is done when you look at a car. And it's amazing how well they've set it up. It really is pretty good.
And it's surprising how few vendors do it on our side.
Yeah, for their own customers or their own cars, right? But it is quite effective, and it does have indirect benefits aside from just cost per VDP. So, and that's just one example. So I would just look at the packet, like, for example, other packages, what other indirect benefits are there, and how do you quantify those in a multitude of metrics, not just VDPs?
Dan, being
Yeah.
on the dealer side, going over to the vendor side, dealer side again, you've been able to see some big changes. You and I were talking before, and you had mentioned, I guess, hiring a classified site, getting rid of them, and then hiring them again.
Yeah.
What's your perspective around that? What's your, any stories around that? How do you? Yeah. I stumble across the words.
Yeah. Part of that exercise was all of a sudden we were in packages and we would just kind of lose track of what was going on. And maybe it might've been a situation where a store signed up for something that maybe I didn't see the value in. Again, holding into that cost per VDP, the cost per VDP would go crazy. And then the argument was, well, that package didn't, do what it's supposed to do, and also being just as efficient as it was prior. So then cancel. And unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say it, but would get into that situation, and then I would use it as leverage to honestly cancel, then to get a better price. And I wouldn't, I don't recommend that. You're part of the third parties, their partner vendors. I think but then that's where the transparent conversation between you and the third party is extremely important. I mean, because they need to understand too that you have, whether the GM's holding the checkbook or the owner is, So similar roles like me, they're sitting in the store. You're getting that third party pressure in your own environment to be efficient with the money that you're spending. And so, but sometimes it just came down to just kind of let them go, and then it would sweat out. But then I would always get this better price, which, you know, it basically it affirmed the action of, I'm gonna fire. You say you can't give me a better price, I'm gonna fire you. You come back with a better price.
So
Not
it's
advocating for that. That wasn't the right move.
Negotiating tactics there.
What's that?
Some great negotiating tactics.
Yeah, that was probably a little more of a bully move than anything, instead of having just a good conversation, which, you know, in 2018 I would recommend.
See, I never had it work that way. I always had it. We were grandfathered into a great price, and if I left and then I'd go to come back, and then the price was more, not less.
That's what they would tell me.
That's always been my experience. I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah,
well,
unlike the customers that walk in the showroom and
yeah, exactly.
on your like sixth pass and say,
let them walk.
We're waiting for you to chase them out the door.
Yep. Still happens quite often, actually.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of dealerships that also will say, you know, we dropped ABC and never saw a difference. You know, we didn't sell any less cars, didn't sell any more cars, everything stayed the same.
That's a feeling, not a measurement.
I know, exactly. Well, that's what I would say. But I see a lot of dealerships.
But John, I mean, you've got to be measuring the right things initially in order to, you know, see what happens later.
Yeah, I think that really should be the function before you cancel. If you don't have the system or architecture in place to measure anything, you have no idea whether you're negotiating a good deal or a bad deal, or if this is something that you should consider removing. So I think it's funny, like the measurement of products often happens right when they sign up, not when they cancel. You know, and I think the measurement for cancellation should be much, much larger than it is, especially when you probably, to Dan's point, may come back, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, trying to measure vendors based on whether or not you're finding newspaper ads in the back of their trades anymore is that doesn't work.
And as the only vendor on this call, I would say that, you know, it's important to have a transparent dialogue with them to get the best deal. The best arrangements I ever had as an e-commerce director were when we really partnered very strongly with our providers, and they, with us, we created more value for them, and that was kind of the way that we got lower pricing. So not necessarily from strong arm tactics, although I had to use that a couple times as well. So I think it's more, again, the metric of how engaged are you with their platforms and their offerings. That's what you can control more than you can sometimes the price.
So you're bringing up a question I really want to ask Dan. And I, Jeff, you experienced this at one point as well. But Dan, you're fresher. What, you know, has your perspective or your conversation that you're having with your vendors now, is that greatly changed since you spent nearly 2 years in the vendor chair?
Yeah, it's well, there's two sides of that, because coming from the vendor side, there was definitely a wish to serve the client the best you possibly could. And so behind the scenes, there was that drive to help them be successful. And then there was kind of that relational attachment there that I hadn't seen, you know, from the 14 years on the retail side. And so coming back to it, I still have really good relationships because I have some of the same reps. But It's not so much leveraging is not the term, but taking that into account that the transparency can be there, and just telling them, hey, this is what I'm struggling with to understand. I don't have all the facts. I think sometimes, especially I saw that on the vendor side, you'd go in there and the person you're talking to or reporting, giving information to and meeting with, were embarrassed to say that they didn't know what was going on in their own store. They were embarrassed to say they didn't understand what you were placing in front of them. And I saw that a lot too, where I knew that who I was speaking to, just because I had sat in that chair and been on the retail side, I knew who I was speaking to didn't have a clue what I was showing them. And so then there was kind of that opportunity to take a step back and explain it. So I think that dynamic is key in the relationships you have with the third parties. My intent is to continue to do that moving forward, if that answers your question.
Sure.
That's the first side, I guess. The second side is the data itself. I'm probably a little wiser on any sort of line I get, especially from, now I'm back in the chair, the number of emails, oh my gosh, and the phone calls from people trying to sell. And if they do it well, I'll listen to them. If they use the word crushing it, killing it, they drop the names of dealer groups I know that try everything. I'm just kind of like,
Two cars.
Yeah, Brian Binstock does it.
So I'm probably wiser in terms of just wading through that very, very quickly.
Yeah, unfortunately, like with regard to the way vendors have to reach out to dealerships to sell their products, and we do this, right? Where the dealer's at on the innovation curve, you have to have a different approach, right?
Yeah.
Dan, especially because you've been experienced and then you've been in a high performance sales and marketing operation like Dealer Inspire, you're as wise as anyone can get, right? Like literally know it all though, right? You've heard it, seen it, whatever. And so to you, authenticity is what's important, right? That's what I think as partners, vendors should strive for, and just, tell them this is a sales call.
Yes.
This is what we're trying to tell you, only when you feel you have an adequate amount of time. That's what we do.
Yeah, you hit that one on the head.
Well, we sort of went down this path last week or the week before. How does a vendor get in front of a dealership? How do they get their message?
Get on Dealer Refresh.
Yeah.
What's that?
They get on Dealer Refresh.
Well, definitely.
Get on Dealer Refresh and participate. I mean,
yeah.
It's one thing just to throw a message on Dealer Refresh and get some exposure, but it's another thing to be like you, John, and actually share.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's huge. There was a thread in there with X Time. Look that one up. But
that was awesome, by the way.
From X Time jumped in to solve our problem, and they were super excited about it. Very transparent of what they were doing there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a phenomenal path.
Yeah, it's always a struggle sometimes to find that balance between how many dealerships or how many within the community, dealers versus vendors. But the reality is, as long as everyone is helping each other, and they've got the right message, they're not being promotional. Sometimes it's difficult because someone has something to say or they're very passionate about their product. They've got an answer to a question, but unfortunately that answer
Watson
is yeah. That answer a lot of times involves maybe their product or solution. But if you've taken the time to become part of the community, to help out whenever people are asking for help and to ask questions, and again, be transparent, it does, man. You can have an ad, and I'm not just talking about Dealer Refresh, but you can have an ad you could have, maybe we do a webinar series or something like with him, but once they're able, and then maybe they write a monthly article or in the blog, but once they're able to tie it back to that person that's in the community, you know, being involved, man, we've seen it how many times firsthand, Alex?
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, many times.
Well, John, you shared with us after that first Refresh Friday you did. You had a dealer who was saying, "Oh my God, I'm talking to Dr. Truth."
Mr. Truth, Dr. Truth.
Well, full disclosure, that I did not. That was Alex that came up with that name. It was Dr. Truth.
Dr. Truth, yeah.
It is Dr. Truth, but you know.
It's definitely cute, guys.
Yeah. So, anything else? I mean, John, I know I feel like you're holding back. You've got all the stats, all the data, man. It's, you know, is there something else out there? Is there something new that you guys are looking at? You know, not to beat the word up, but attribution. I know we've had a couple of quick conversations around some attribution and Google having their beacon piece. And is there anything in the horizon that you're seeing, maybe a change up in measurements? Is there any technology out there that you've got your eye on to help dealerships figure out the attribution?
I mean, I stand by everything I said the last time I came on, one of the first times I came on, where I talked about the realities of attribution. I think what I said then is basically happened. Google is taking it over. It's impossible to really do it without, you know, outside of that ecosystem. So I think what you're seeing is platform level attribution now. That's kind of like super platform level attribution, like Amazon, obviously Google, and we'll probably see some stuff with partnerships, you know, between companies that are now acquired by larger companies, right? Where within those ecosystems, it can work, but these ecosystems are not going to share the unique identifiers across these super platforms.
No.
So if you are trying to translate the value from one to another to yourself, it's still going to be really, really hard. And I feel that, you know, it does end up being a rabbit hole for, you know, when I was as an e-commerce trader trying to figure that out, you know, there's 99 other things to probably do before you work on that. And I still feel strongly about that. In terms of, if you're a dealership and you're trying to really focus on something that can add an incredible amount of value, it is having unbelievable data hygiene and, you know, data accuracy in your store. So if you, you know, let's just assume that a year to 2 years from now, there's a solution out there for attribution. Let's just say that it works perfect. The thing that you're going to need to have is the most accurate sales, service, and CRM data in those core systems for it to work, for the identity resolution to work. And so when we onboard a dealership, we're able to see how quality their information collection efforts are, because we're taking that data and we're pushing it into Facebook custom audiences from their CRM, DMS, etc. And the match rates, you know, are typically above 90%. But for some dealerships, it can be quite poor because of F&I best practices that they're not following in terms of making sure that it's in the DMS, you know, actually having all of their sales and leads in the CRM versus just bypassing it in the DMS. Like, I still think that those core things are essential and really just aren't discussed. And it's not fun to talk about. Like, let's set up data hygiene in your dealership. That's like literally the most boring thing in the world to do.
It's a wonderful conversation to have with the F&I manager.
Super valuable. And so, you know, the other thing that, you know, that we're talking about a lot is establishing a global customer ID across, you know, all of the customers, because we have one customer that, like, let's say for the case of Dan, you have 5 or 6 stores, I think, Dan, for Anderson? Is it 6 or 7?
Well, yeah, we tell vendors we have 5, but we have 9.
Well, you're done now.
It's 5. There's 5 DMS points.
Yeah, we just split it out into 9, but I only want to pay 5. But do all that.
Well, if you got 5 rooftops, that's legit.
Yeah. But you have customers that have bought from 4 of the 5 stores, right? Or I'm sure, right? You have customers that will submit leads to all of them. And so that duplicity in the data is probably 10, 15% in the dealer's database if they have regional stores. And so if you think about it, in one system, you may have half of the information you have in some of the other ones, and you need that blended together. So establishing global customer IDs for providers for these major platforms, that to me is an essential thing for them to focus on for products like attribution to actually work. So, and again, these are things that no one really has worked on in our space that much.
I brought this article up real quick. Steve wrote this earlier this week, and it's
Steve Stawning?
Yeah, it was exactly what you're saying. You know, he just goes into the boring stuff that sells cars, and it's, you know, CRM data. That's exactly what he was talking about.
Steve, I didn't steal your thunder, man. I didn't read this. I will after the thing. But yeah, Steve, again, this is a very conservative idea. Like, let's just do the really fundamental things before the exotic things. And I think, you know, that's maybe the moral story of today. Like, cost per VDP is not a scorecard of the vendor. It's a scorecard on yourself. And data hygiene is not a scorecard on the vendor. It's a scorecard on yourself. So what are the metrics for data hygiene? How do you move those metrics? What are the policies and procedures that you should have in place? And what is the benefit of implementing those long term?
And guys, this really fucking blows. So we're sitting here, you know, it's dealer refresh. People are expecting, you know, tip of the sword stuff. We got Jon Berna on, Dan bringing some super wisdom. We're going to drop some big VDP knowledge bombs, and here we are, back to basics.
It's our fault.
Data hygiene.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the future of data hygiene is that products are going to do the hygiene for you. And so, you know, what we try to do is hybridize the data across all the transactions to do that for the dealer. But the long and short of it, though, is that, you know, a dealership that does that versus, all things being equal, a dealership that does that versus one that doesn't, it's a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, so quickly, both of you can answer this. Looking at the VDPs, looking at the measurements and KPIs that you're able to, John, are there some things within the merchandising realm that make a huge difference? I mean, we know all the basics, of course, great descriptions, great photos, pricing, of course, you know, all that good stuff. Is there anything, have you seen anything within your reporting that sticks something out a little bit more than any of the other merchandising elements, or are they all pretty much about the same of importance?
I think that's just your blocking, tackling. If you're unable to do that within your organization, you're just creating your problems up front. And I had a report and I can't find it. I measured quite a few years. I gave all the stores a merchandising report card. I should probably fire that back up. See, it's my fault. But the score is based off photos, price, complete description, and then there was a point attribution to those. And every store had it, and I ran it every month. And I ran that against sales volume. And the uncanniness, and it's not a surprise to those who's paying attention, but that indicator for the score, as the score went up and dropped, sales exactly matched and went up and dropped. So at that point, it was kind of like a complete justification to the stores of how much they were being annoyed by me pounding them on merchandising, you know, photos, price.
It's that fourth month selling cars. You know, you're a green pea, you come in, you got your first month of learning a bit, and your second month you do pretty well. Third month goes pretty well, and then your fourth month goes into the toilet. And go in, boss walks up to you and he says, you got to get back to basics. You got too smart. Forget everything you learned. And then you have a good month again. Yep.
Yeah, I'd also argue
it's
that
rocket science.
All those failures associated with really high quality merchandising, regardless of like the online performance of those cars, it's gonna improve the health of all your sales. Like, you know what I mean? Like those activities, like again, going through the recon process correctly, going through the picture process correctly, that's going to lead to turn no matter what. But those are just really essential activities for a dealership.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of like, what are the like really high level metrics or the next level metrics for inventory? One of the conversations I have a lot is establishing on taking the car in the, you know, the exact strategy for each car. So like, for example, individual cars having an expected date that you want that car sold when you're taking it in, and then changing all of your strategies around that, kind of getting, like, day supply is a factor, but to you as a dealer, it should be like, this car I want gone on this date, that date, and then having a different strategy based on what you know. So I think the strategies are becoming more dynamic per car, and I think we're very close to where all the pricing should be probably automated based on VDPs, lead count, you know, how many test drives, you know, how many times we've written up a car. Like, I think we're almost to the point where we don't need to price cars anymore. The system should price cars.
That's a stretch. I'm with you though.
If you have 700 used cars, right?
Yeah.
I 100% buy into that.
Yeah.
I think that there's there are a number of things that can be automated. I mean, if you look at what Dale Pollock was able to do, he's basically saying, hey, look, price your cars based on market data. And if you throw in some other algorithms on top of that, that maybe fit your sales history or your mix and things of that nature, then yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like it would be hard to do, but I think we're kind of doing it as humans, right? So on 80% of cars, if you could automate it, and then the other 20% where I can now focus on those problems and not automate those, I think that would help. I think that would where I would want to start, not do all of it, but the ones that are in this swim lane, right, that I know what they're going to be like, and they're consistent to my inventory and I know how to price them, automate those. But these 20% that are outside of the swim lane that I'm used to, I'll price those, I'll manage those. I think that to me is the next obvious step for these inventory management solutions.
Yeah, and you almost need, I might be jumping way out there, but like you almost need your website provider in on that too.
Yeah, I mean,
you need the engagement points that are, yeah.
It's not, that's why, again, it comes into having everything in an environment where you can actually logically say, okay, this car should be priced here. And by doing that, we can expect this to happen. So that's a prescriptive measurement, right? So you're saying, if you do this, it will reasonably change the outcome this way. And I think then the system would obviously be able to make that choice because it's a good choice. So predicting a future state based on a variable changing, that's kind of the next level stuff.
Yeah, that's coming. It's,
really?
you know, I did write I think I threw a blog or a forum post up. I can't remember which, but it feels like to me that we are 20 years ago now. There's a whole bunch of startups that are coming. And in 1998, there were a whole lot of startups that were coming up, and they were pushing two technologies that like dealers weren't really on board with, especially in 1998. There was this thing called websites and this other thing called CRM. And then out of that came, you know, digital marketing elements and all sorts of things like that. And of course, we got into inventory merchandising elements, followed up by inventory pricing to intelligence and things of that nature. And it's like, here we are, it's 2008, it's 20 years later. We've got a lot of the solutions are owned by a very small group of giant corporations. And now there's a bunch of little guys that are about to come out, and it's going to get exciting again. I think the next 10 years are going to be quite interesting.
Next year for sure. I mean, we have really kind of tried to find opportunities to partner with those smaller companies and look where we have common ground, not as much overlap where we can help each other. And I think that's a good thing. And what's interesting is that the mentality of all these companies that are coming up is that they want to be open with each other. They don't want to create these revenue sharing deals. They just want it to be, hey, let's just partner for the sake of adding value to the dealer, because the strength, that's really the only option they have. They have to have strength in numbers. So I think that mentality is very pro dealer, and I'm excited to see more of it next year.
Agreed. And by the way, if you are one of those companies, a startup who is you know, nipping at the heels of the giants, Dealer Refresh is here for you. Please come over. Please post, you know, something in Deals for Dealers, or knock on mine or Jeff's door, and we'll help you, you know, get your name out there.
Yep.
Yeah, especially small startups, you know, it's one thing I've always been excited about was, you know, having Dealer Refresh be that platform for some of the startups, companies out there that are just getting their foot in the door, and they've got some great solutions, some great products. But again, as we mentioned earlier, how do you get in front of dealerships? How do you get your product in front of them? How do you get the opportunity to demonstrate them and show exactly, you know, what your solutions are able to provide to dealerships? And
the timing there for those smaller startups is tricky right now, because you almost have to have a OEM partnership. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And then that usually a lot of times ends up, you know, screwing them. They don't realize it. So,
well, you know,
the
point on the OEM thing is you don't have to have that right away.
No.
I think
and the cost of startup is far less than it was 20 years ago.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you can offer lower pricing. You can do all sorts.
Remember the first month we spun up our first application to integrate with Dealer Vault. Our Microsoft bill that month was $74. It's many thousands now. But I just look back, and I had no idea how Microsoft Azure worked. I watched a whole bunch of videos, figured it out, and had some partners of mine and a partner that helped set it all up. But our first bill was $74. And anybody can afford that. Anybody can get started. It is not, to Alex's point, it is not that expensive to get started.
Yeah. The real trick is surviving after, you know, 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gentlemen, it's 10 after the hour. I think we'll bring this to an end. Thank everybody for joining us today. As Alex mentioned earlier, get in the forums, communicate, start a discussion, ask a question, answer a question. You know, if you're on vendor side, dealer side, be transparent.
Hey, look, this is testament to that right here. Dan would not be on Refresh Friday. We would not be having this episode today had he not jumped in the forums right away and asked what he had.
Yeah, again, thank you for that, Dan. I mean, that's something that, anytime there's a great topic, great discussion, we want to dive into a little bit further. We can bring a vendor on that's got some great knowledge, some great data to either support or debunk. We've got the opportunity to do that. So it's great whenever we can take a discussion like that and turn it into a Refresh Friday. Yeah, it's exciting. So, but yeah, Facebook, we'll be back here next week, same time. YouTube for all of our previous recordings of Refresh Friday. We've also got some other promos over there. Some of our sponsors have some videos that you can check out. As Steve Stoning only says, Ad Click Friday, I believe this is verbiage. See some ads, click them on Dealer Refresh. Help, check out their products, watch the videos, whatever it takes. I know a lot of times, especially on the vendor side, sometimes it's not about, I'm not afraid to change. It's a lot of work sometimes, to change a website provider, to change a CRM provider. Huge. I mean, that's a project. But sometimes if you're not doing it, you could be cutting your own throat and missing out on selling a lot more cars, doing a lot more service, whatever it may be. So John, thanks for joining us as always. I'm sure we'll have you back on pretty soon. Dan, thanks for asking the question and joining us today. As Alex said,
sometime, Dan, we got to show your video, man.
I was going to go there, but for some odd reason, I don't know if it's a storm we're having here or not, but the connection's not so great. So
rats.
I'm sure you're disappointed. And thanks for Dealer Authority sponsoring this Refresh Friday. If you are...
Oh yeah, Dealer Authority is going to be live at 4 today. They got a pretty big announcement.
4 and 5. They're going to be introducing I guess they have a new product, Octane 360. It's a release party. So I don't know, maybe grab a beverage, go behind your desk and hit play.
You're still at the store, get some vodka.
You always got in your car, who knows. So, but again, we'll be here. Thanks everyone. Back here next Friday, same time. Next week we have we've got a newcomer here to the forums.
Dane, right?
Yes, Dane Seville. And Dane is a content marketing strategist. He's worked with a huge amount of dealerships with their content strategy. He's a copywriter. And he currently is a brand manager for a larger or small, I'm not sure how big the agency is, but for an agency that I think obviously is in the automotive side, but I think maybe they are an agency for other verticals as well. So I'm excited about this. We always have had and still have a lot of conversation around content. What's your strategy around content, whether it's written, video, and then how does SEO tie into that? Is there still room for SEO on your content, especially how it ties into to social and all that great stuff? So excited about that. We'll be back here next Friday, same time with Dan. So thank you, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.